The Donbas region, located in eastern Ukraine, has been at the center of conflict between Ukraine and Russia since 2014. While the tensions may seem to be primarily about territory, the region holds far deeper significance for both nations. Historically, economically, and strategically, Donbas is more than just land. It's a crucial geopolitical arena that embodies the complex relationship between Russia and Ukraine. To understand why the Donbas region is so important to both sides, we must first delve into its history, economic resources, cultural significance, and the strategic implications it holds for the broader regional and international landscape. The Donbas, which is shorthand for the Donetsk Basin, encompasses the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. The history of this area is intertwined with both Ukraine and Russia. Historically, the Donbas became an industrial hub under the Russian Empire and later during the Soviet Union. The Donbas region became a core of Soviet industrialization in the 19th and 20th centuries, particularly during the rapid modernization under Joseph Stalin. Heavy industries like coal mining, metallurgy, and machine building became central to the region's economy. By the mid-20th century, Donbas was considered one of the USSR's most significant industrial areas. Its coal mines were among the largest in Europe, and the region provided much of the energy that fueled Soviet industry. For Russia, the historical connection to Donbas runs deep. Many ethnic Russians migrated to the region over decades, creating a large Russian-speaking population. Donbas symbolized the Soviet Union's industrial might, a status that resonates with many in Russia, even today. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Ukraine became an independent state, and Donbas became part of Ukraine's territory. However, this transfer of governance didn't erase the Russian cultural and linguistic influence that had been embedded over centuries. For many in the region, their identity remained connected to Russia. Thus, the collapse of the Soviet Union created a political and cultural fault line, which would later fuel tensions. Ukraine's independence came with an inherent challenge for Donbas. Many Russian speakers, ethnic Russians, and those who identified with the Soviet past found themselves in a newly formed Ukrainian nation that was forging its identity based on language, culture, and national sovereignty. The region's cultural ties to Russia became a crucial issue as Ukraine gradually distanced itself from Moscow's influence. The Donbas region remains rich in coal and other natural resources. The coal mines of Donbas have long been the heart of Ukraine's industrial economy. During the Soviet era, these mines provided energy to much of the Soviet Union, and today they continue to be an essential part of Ukraine's economy. Additionally, Donbas is home to numerous industries, including steel production, machine building, and chemical plants. These industries contribute significantly to Ukraine's GDP and provide jobs for thousands of people. Losing control of Donbas would mean Ukraine loses a significant portion of its industrial base, which is vital for its economic stability. For Russia, gaining control of Donbas would give it access to a highly industrialized region, reinforcing its economic influence in Eastern Europe. Controlling these resources would also weaken Ukraine economically, making it more dependent on foreign aid and reducing its ability to stand against Russian influence. Beyond coal, Donbas holds a critical role in Ukraine's broader energy infrastructure. Pipelines that transport natural gas from Russia to Europe run through this region. Control over these pipelines is a key point of leverage for both Ukraine and Russia, especially since Europe is heavily dependent on Russian gas supplies. Russia has used gas as a political weapon in the past, cutting off supplies to Ukraine during disputes. By destabilizing Donbas or even gaining control of it, Russia could exert pressure on Ukraine and potentially disrupt gas supplies to Europe. For Ukraine, retaining control of Donbas means maintaining sovereignty over its energy infrastructure and securing a significant bargaining chip in its relationship with Russia and the West. One of the major reasons Donbas is contested is its large Russian-speaking population. According to various estimates, a significant portion of the population in Donetsk and Luhansk regions identify as ethnically Russian or Russian-speaking Ukrainians. This demographic reality is often exploited by Russia, which claims to be protecting the rights of Russian speakers in Ukraine. The issue of language and identity is a deeply emotional one in this region. While many residents of Donbas identify culturally and linguistically with Russia, others see themselves as Ukrainian, though they may speak Russian. This dual identity has created a complex and volatile situation. In 2014, pro-Russian sentiment in the region led to the emergence of separatist movements, with some factions seeking greater autonomy or outright independence from Ukraine. The concept of Ruski Mir, or the Russian world, is a cultural and political ideology promoted by the Russian government. It asserts that Russia has a duty to protect Russian speakers and Russian culture, not just within its borders, but also in neighboring countries. This idea has been central to Russia's foreign policy, particularly in Ukraine. For Moscow, Donbas represents a crucial frontier in the struggle for the Ruski Mir. By asserting influence over the region, Russia can claim to be defending the interests of ethnic Russians and Russian speakers, reinforcing its role as a protector of Russian culture abroad. This notion has been used to justify Russian intervention in the region, from supporting separatists to deploying military forces under the guise of humanitarian assistance. Ukraine, on the other hand, views Donbas as an integral part of its national territory. Ukrainian leaders have consistently rejected the notion that Donbas should be granted any special status or autonomy, arguing that the region's future must be determined by the Ukrainian people, not by Moscow. The Donbas region serves as a crucial buffer zone between Russia and the rest of Ukraine. For Russia, maintaining influence over Donbas helps prevent Ukraine from fully integrating with the West, particularly with institutions like NATO and the European Union. As long as conflict persists in Donbas, Ukraine's path to NATO membership remains complicated, as NATO members are unlikely to admit a country embroiled in an active territorial dispute. Russia's control over parts of Donbas also allows it to maintain a foothold in Ukraine, ensuring that Kyiv cannot fully escape Moscow's sphere of influence. This has broader implications for Russian foreign policy, as Ukraine's geopolitical orientation has long been a point of contention between Russia and the West. The conflict over Donbas cannot be viewed in isolation from broader international dynamics. Since the annexation of Crimea in 2014 and the outbreak of conflict in Donbas, Western nations, particularly the United States and the European Union, have provided political, economic, and military support to Ukraine. For the West, Donbas is a symbol of resistance against Russian aggression. The region represents the front line in the broader struggle between democratic, European values and authoritarianism. Western nations see the defense of Ukraine's sovereignty as essential to maintaining the post-Cold War international order, where borders cannot be changed by force. At the same time, the West's support for Ukraine complicates Russia's ambitions. Sanctions imposed by Western countries have weakened the Russian economy, and continued Western backing for Ukraine ensures that the conflict remains a thorn in Moscow's side. However, the West's involvement also raises the stakes, turning what could have been a regional conflict into a proxy war between Russia and the broader Western alliance. Since the outbreak of the conflict in 2014, thousands of people have been killed, and millions have been displaced. The fighting in Donbas has taken a heavy toll on civilians, with entire towns and cities devastated by artillery fire and airstrikes. Infrastructure has been destroyed, and many residents have been forced to flee their homes, seeking refuge in other parts of Ukraine or abroad. For Ukraine, the human cost of losing Donbas is not just economic or political, it's deeply personal. Many of the people displaced by the conflict are Ukrainian citizens who have been caught in the crossfire of a war they did not choose. Reintegrating these displaced populations and rebuilding the region will be an enormous challenge for Ukraine if and when the conflict is resolved. For Russia, the humanitarian crisis in Donbas is a point of leverage. Moscow has used the plight of civilians in the region as a justification for its actions, claiming to be providing humanitarian aid to those affected by the fighting. However, critics argue that Russia has played a direct role in fueling the conflict, making it complicit in the suffering of civilians. Even if a political resolution to the conflict is found, the scars left by the war will last for generations. The displacement of millions of people, the destruction of infrastructure, and the deep cultural divisions that have emerged will make reconciliation difficult. Both Russia and Ukraine will face enormous challenges in rebuilding trust and restoring stability in the region. The conflict has also raised important questions about the future of international diplomacy. Can borders be redrawn by force in the 21st century? What role should international organizations like the United Nations play in resolving such conflicts? The answers to these questions will shape the future of not just Donbas, but of global politics more broadly. In conclusion, the Donbas region is critical to both Russia and Ukraine for a multitude of reasons: historical, economic, cultural, and geopolitical. For Ukraine, it represents a vital part of its national territory, an industrial heartland, and a symbol of sovereignty. For Russia, it's a culturally significant region with a large Russian-speaking population and a key piece of its broader strategy to maintain influence in Eastern Europe. The conflict over Donbas is more than just a territorial dispute. It's a microcosm of the larger struggle between Russia and the West, between competing visions of national identity and sovereignty. As long as the fighting continues, the region will remain a flashpoint in the ongoing tensions between Ukraine and Russia, with implications that extend far beyond the borders of both nations.